Hi everyone. Welcome to CSCI 100 Lecture 12. In this lecture, we'll be covering images. But before we can cover images, we have to talk about two-dimensional lists and nested for loops. Now, these concepts of lists and for loops aren't new. We've already learned about them in past lecture. But I'm going to take a bit of time to review those concepts and apply them in a slightly new way, in a novel way. That'll help us better understand how to work with images. Let's start with two-dimensional lists. So far we know that of a list as an ordered collection, I'll get my laser pointer out here, an ordered collection, items of any type. Now, I didn't really highlight this word, these two words here, any type, before, but I want to really highlight them now because this implies something interesting, which is a list is a type. So does that mean a list can have lists in it? And the answer is absolutely yes. So whenever you have a list that holds other lists as items in that list, we call this a two-dimensional list. And two dimensions because there's a list holding a list. If you wanted to get more complicated, a three-dimensional list would be a list that holds lists that hold lists, and so on and so forth. Remember, every list can hold any item, any types of items. And so you can have very, very nested lists instead of other lists. But for this class, and for now, we're just going to focus on these two-dimensional lists. Yeah, and here's an example of what one looks like. Again, as a reminder, our lists are defined by these brackets, and inside of them we have comma-separated values. So here, for example, this right here is a list of 3 names. But you'll notice that this list of 3 names is actually the first item in this seating list. So the seating list has an open bracket and a closed bracket, and then 3 items that are separated by commas here, which is the first list, which is the first item, the second list is the second item, and the third list is the third item. But remember, as a reminder, when we count the order of items in a list, we start counting from 0 because Python is 0 indexed. So the first item is actually index 0 here. And then inside of our list, that's in the first item of seating, we have a list of 3 names. Anton, Jordan, and Joy. And with these nested lists or two-dimensional lists, it's useful for you to think of them as representing some sort of grid structure. And so here, the easiest thing I could think of to represent this grid would be a classroom. Which I know maybe is a bad example because all of us haven't seen a classroom in a while. But we all know and we all remember from earlier years, a classroom with desks. And so here, this nested two-dimensional list is actually a seating chart. And it maps out really well. So each item in the seating list is a row in the classroom. And then each item in the row is a student who sits in that row in this particular order. So this first row here is Anton, Jordan, Joy. And so if I print seating 0, this is an expression. So indexing into this seating list is an expression that evaluates to whatever value is stored at this index in the list. Again, nothing special going on here. This is not a new concept. I'm just showing you an example of how one of the items can be a list. So print seating 0. And sorry, here we're actually missing a name. We should have Anton, Jordan, and Joy should be here as well. And Joy. There we go. And Joy. Now, if we print seating 1, we get back the second row in the class, which is Ibrahim, Sam, and Pooja. And of course, printing the third row is Okoro, Nathan, and Mira. Now this is how you get back your rows, but what if you actually want to look at a particular student? So if you want to look at a particular student, you go and get their row, and then you index into that row because it itself is a list to get whatever student you want in that row. So here, for example, I have the first row in the class, which remember is the 0th row because in Python we start counting from 0. And now if I want to get this student right here, who is the second student in the row from the left, so the the first student because we start counting from 0, so index 1, we get we do seeding 0, 1, because this right here evaluates to the list Anton, Jordan, Joy, and then we will index into whatever list is given back here to get the index 1 item. You can see this prints Jordan. I'm going to take a minute here to, again, reiterate this point, because now that you have indexing happening into indexing, it might be confusing when you see something like this. Seeding 0, 1, what is this talking about? I want you to think about it this way. Python will need to evaluate this inner value first, this inner index, before it can evaluate the outer index. Kind of the way you can think about this is if you tried to look at this expression and you were like, okay, I'm going to get index 1. Well, index 1 of what? Index 1 of whatever these brackets are next to. Okay, well, these brackets are next to seeding index 0. So this inner expression has to be evaluated first. We first get the 0th item in the seeding list, which up here, this was the 0th item here, this row. This is seeding 0, is this row. You can see that's what this evaluates to. Anton, Jordan, Joy, the list, because that is the first item in the list, index 0. And then we get the first index 1 item out of the list that seeding 0 evaluates to. This is an expression. And so when we do that, index 1 is Jordan here in this list. So I'll point out here, notice something that with this structure of lists, lists inside of lists to represent kind of a grid, 0, 0 is the top left corner. And as you increment the first number, you're going down to a different row. So the first number is the row, and the second number is the column, from left to right for columns and from top to bottom for rows. So what is the index of this student? Think about it for a moment in your head. Pause the video. How would you index into our seeding two-dimensional list to get this student's name? Well, we have 3 rows, 1, 2, 3, and the row is the first index because we're going by row. So we have 0, 1, row 0 here, row 1. Okay, so row 1 and column 0. So we get seeding 1, which will evaluate to this row, the second row, and then index 0 of this row will be the very first person in this row. Okay, how about this person? Go ahead and pause the video. See if you can tell me how we would get back the name of this student given the setup that we have for our nested list, two-dimensional list. Okay, well, the same thing applies here. We have, so this would be the first list, so index 0. The second list, index 1. The third list, index 2. So getting the second index 2 row, which is the third row. And then within this row, we go and get the index 1 student here, which will be the second student in the row. So we get seeding 2, 1. Okay, one more. What about this person at the very end? This one should be very similar to the last one. So we have the same row, row 2, row index 2, because we start counting from 0. And then the column is column index 2 as well. So here we should have seeding 2, 2. So again, notice how the top left corner is always 0, 0 in this setup that we have.